Since ancient times, man has dreamed of mastering that which is beyond his control. In the process of numerous trainings, learning to experience the highest loads painlessly, to fight the elements, or even to fly. And at a time when we are used to seeing athletes on the glossy covers of magazines, few people know about what these people sometimes have to go through. After all, it often happens that things do not go according to plan. And that's when you can only hope for a miracle. And today, we will talk about such an unsafe sport as Paralanerism. Namely, the case of an athlete who can rightfully be considered the luckiest woman in the world. After all, one day, because of the elements, she rose to an unthinkable height for a man, where only jets fly. And being so high in the sky, she still managed to find her strength. But first things first. Eva was born in a city in southeastern Poland. She, like many people, graduated from university and traveled the world. But just one incident changed her life and put her name in history. One day, while at a mountain resort in Portugal, Eva noticed how desperate paragliders, with their inherent daring and ease, accelerate down a ramp, and the airflow picks them up and sends them on a journey across the sky, where they are left to their own devices. This sight inspired the girl madly. It was only then that she realized what her vocation was. Quite soon, Eva found courses for training of paragliders, and after mastering basic skills, she did not stop, creating with the purpose to become a professional sportswoman. Ever since, the stubborn girl has been training hard and has even won several amateur competitions. Eva confidently went to participate in serious tournaments and dreamed of getting into the national team of her country. Although the Poles didn't see any prospects in her, an offer was soon received from the German national team. Over the next few years, the paraglider was unable to win a single title. But at the time, she had no idea what she would be facing in the near future. On February 14, 2007, the city of Manila in the Australian state of New South Wales welcomed some 200 of the best athletes from 40 countries. And Eva, against all odds, was among them. Nothing seemed to be able to stop the grand event. However, the participants were soon informed that on the day of the flight, clouds might gather in the sky and there was a good chance of thunderstorms. But after assessing all the risks, Eva was ready to take the drastic step. After all, nothing seemed to be able to stop her on the day. After all, visually the skies were indeed clear. And after skipping a few competitors who still refused to perform, our heroine got ready to fly. Everything started quietly enough, and having started a little bit later than others, Eva and her Australian friend and Chinese paraglider were in the sky, but very soon were completely isolated from other competitors. After missing them, the trio gained straight into thunderclouds, while the other athletes, having assessed the situation, were already on their way down. The trio was still gaining altitude, completely unaware of what was happening on the ground at the time. Confidently, Eva was in the sky, figuring she could stay out of the clouds. However, the situation was changing by the second. Small clouds quickly formed into clouds, and soon the whole thing became a huge storm system. Eva's teammates at that moment had already landed in a safe area, confident that they would soon find her as well. However, there was no news from the girl. One of the competitors had miraculously landed on some farm and quickly, breaking away from his glider, ran to the nearest barn. After all, the weather was just awful. He was well aware that his friend was in great trouble. After all, not the most pleasant thoughts are reinforced with the information that the Chinese teen found more than 43 miles from the launch site his strong companion with numerous fractures. And that meant only that the two athletes of the trio survived. But no one had a clue about Eva's fate, and the worry was more than justified. For in those moments she was tethered to her plan, and the thundercloud lifted her upward like a rocket, finding herself in a real wind tunnel. Eva prayed that the wind would throw her out of the cloud. In contrast, however, visibility grew weaker and weaker. The powerful air currents were picking up the fragile woman at 3 feet per second. She had only to hope that her partners could intercept the GPS signal. But she had no idea that all the equipment was gone by then. As the organizer of the World Championship later said, before that the record height of a human flight was 0.4 miles. But in those minutes, Eva was already at an altitude where airliners usually fly, namely an unreal 6 miles. Such an altitude is fatal for any human being. Eventually, the storm system took her to the very top of the cargo cloud, where she literally found herself suspended in the sky. But that wasn't the worst of it, either. After all, the air temperature was about -50 degrees, and the glider's face, gloves, and wings were covered with a thick layer of ice. In general, it was simply impossible to survive in such a situation. After all, even if it had happened, there would have been irreversible brain damage. So it is not surprising at all that, having received an enormous overload, not having a breathing apparatus with her, Eva eventually lost consciousness. And perhaps, in that situation, this was the best outcome. The athlete spent 40 minutes in such a condition, but suddenly something snapped. As it turned out, the wing of the airplane couldn't take the weight of the ice on her face, and once it folded, the athlete began a free fall downward that felt like someone turned on gravity and yet was falling at about 140 miles per hour. He was still unconscious. That probably would have been the end of the story, and the newspapers would have made headlines about the brave athlete's death, but then a real miracle happened. The glider suddenly opened again and stabilized its fall. A sharp jerk of the wings was able to bring the athlete to her senses. The woman again understood what was going on, although the danger had not disappeared. Eva was still in the cargo cloud, and she could hardly move her joints due to the severe frostbite. In the meantime, her team was scrambling all over the place, trying to get on the trail, and a message from her friend, who managed to get in touch and tell what danger she was really in, only added to the panic of the search team. Nevertheless, by some miracle in the midst of all this horror, Eva still tried to control her course and taking, not having hands on the glider's brakes, tried to save herself from a seemingly hopeless situation. And that's exactly what helped her. By that time, the athlete had fainted several times, and each time, coming to consciousness for a fraction of a second, she prayed loudly, and after an hour of inhuman exertion, the woman did manage to get out of the thundercloud. She had yet to make an emergency landing 2 miles from the farming village. But that wasn't all. She lay on the cold Australian ground, shivering with cold, trying to keep her body warm. No one knew where she was or whether she was alive at all. So with the last of her strength, she scraped the ice off her GPS watch, and before she could black out again, she was able to send her coordinates. Fortunately, her friends were able to quickly find the champion, and before the arrival of the medical team to provide first aid by wrapping her in blankets. Eva's health was indeed a cause for concern, for her body was covered with bruises from bruises, and one of her limbs was severely frostbitten, and her ears seemed to be atrophied at all. Nevertheless, Eva was still alive. After the woman was admitted to the hospital, her health was no longer in danger. After analyzing the flight data, all the experts were shocked. After all, the man had never been at such a high altitude before. What to say? Even birds and airplanes did not fly so high. And here was a fragile woman. Later experts found out that it was the loss of consciousness at an altitude of 6 miles, as strange as it may sound, but was able to save her. After all, in the unconscious state, all processes in the body slowed down, and it was thanks to this that the heart was able to cope with the unreal load. But at the same time, they only held their hands up, not understanding how this was possible. More than an hour without oxygen at an extreme altitude of -50 degrees. It looked as if someone was helping her from above. And who knows, because Eva herself remembers almost nothing. Needless to say, that soon the whole world knew about the incredible and inexplicable case of Eva's survival, and journalists have rushed to dub it the luckiest woman in the world. Although she became famous not for her sporting achievements, and she herself, albeit unknowingly, but set a world record and put her name in history. It is worth adding that even in spite of the unique flight, the desperate sportswoman participated in various tournaments until she gave up the sport. Well, the story of Eva once again proves the fact that our world still has a lot of unexplainable things, and no one knows how limitless may be the human body, and who helps us in such moments. Friends, what do you think of this story? How did she manage to survive? Be sure to write your opinion in the comments. But for today, that's probably all. Enjoy the video, and see you soon.